Well, hello.
Hello, Simon Kennedy Ellis.
It's just a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure and it's never a chore. I hope you know that.
Did you? Do you know what? I heard a term this week which I'd never heard before,
Oh, okay.
and it was the term emotional affair.
Oh, right. I have heard of this.
You have heard of this?
I have heard of this, but tell me what did you say how? How have I heard of it?
Yeah, this stuff that leaks into your brain. I'm sorry, but I think this every time I think about this. Oh, I've got something he won't have thought about this. He won't have heard of this. No.
Okay. Shall we explain what an emotional affair is for
Well,
those people
you
listening
need to explain
to
it.
who
Yeah.
to you in case I've got it wrong?
This is a podcast in which two friends talk about the pleasures, absurdities, and imperfections of being human. I'm Simon Ellis.
And I'm Lee Miller. Welcome to Midlifing.
Well, not because I don't want to check up on you, because clearly it's because I only just heard it for the first time, and it's really done my head in a little bit.
So I think, so an emotional affair is the language ascribed to a relationship between somebody and somebody else. And one of those people will be in a partnership. So let's say there's a man who is married to a woman, and the woman has a close relationship to another man, and she shares intimate knowledge with, she is open, she perhaps discusses the flaws in her relationship with her husband, she relies on that person for emotional support and care, she's intimate but not physically intimate with that person, and there is a sense of a deep emotional connection and resonance between those two people, which is understood to be at the overall
expense.
Loss of the main expense. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. At the expense of the formalized relationship, the marriage, if you will. That's how I understand an emotional affair.
Wow.
Is that what you got?
No, I did. Seriously, I just heard the term, and it just made me. And I had a little look online before we talked this morning, and just went, "Oh, okay, it is pretty much what I." So it does imply. Does it imply either implicitly or explicitly? Can you have an explicit implication? I don't think so. It implies that it implies implicitly that that there's a betrayal. Is that? Do you think that's the case?
I think it does. I think it does, and I think what I find a bit kind of squiffy about it is I'm never entirely sure who is feeling betrayed.
Oh, surely in the example you gave of the woman in the marriage who starts having emotionally connected conversations with another man, that the man in the marriage feels betrayed.
Yeah, this is where I get a little bit like about it. Okay, I'm going to ask a direct question, perhaps rather than being squiffy about it. Do you think?
What does squiffy mean? Squiffy means a little
as
bit
in like wobbly, uncertain, confused, just like a little bit like discombobulated.
Great.
It's just like I'm not sure. I'm not fully settled.
Great.
And maybe it's because I don't feel like I've got any skin in this fight, particularly.
Right.
I'm trying to think if I've ever had an emotional affair. And I think there have been moments where I have... No, I haven't. I was going to say where I have... I think probably... Oh, no. I've developed close friendships with people outside of my marriage.
Yes.
But just the nature of my marriage is it's like a Hoover. Everything eventually just gets sucked into it. So nothing stays outside of it.
It's a black hole. You're saying your marriage is a black hole.
No, because that suggests no light can escape it. And I would say that it's probably the source of all light for the entire
the sun.
Universe.
Oh, the universe. Sorry, not just our solar system.
No, way bigger.
Sorry for reducing you both like that.
Okay.
I really,
that's fine.
I hope you can forgive me.
I can try to forgive you. Yeah, I think
Talk about
when
betrayals.
when I've developed relationships with other people, those people have been brought into my marriage.
So that's the line, basically. It's the line if there are things being talked about or exchanged which are kept separate from...
Right, yeah, that's a good point.
Because that happens. Surely that happens all the time. I mean, you have conversations with people all the time, which are quite. I mean, I would have thought, but maybe I'm just I'm betraying myself here, which is that you're having quite emotionally quite complex conversations with people which don't necessarily get drawn into your marriage.
No, I don't. Is that weird? That's weird, isn't it? That's weird.
No, I'm thinking that I might be thinking that I'm weird. I'm weirder. It's like we could have called this podcast Weird and Weirder.
No, we could just keep swapping which is which. I think everybody who I've built a relationship with who has been outside of my marriage, as in the sense that somebody who Bob doesn't know, in short order, if they are going to become important to me, will be absorbed into. They will meet Bob. They will know Bob. They will begin to have a relationship of their own with Bob. And I think vice versa. Well, I don't think, and vice versa. Obviously, there's different volumes. It's like there'll be people who
You say volumes.
Yeah, as in like my relationship with certain people is turned up louder for me than it is for Bob, and the other way around. Yeah, and maybe that's really unhealthy because it means that we don't have people outside of our sphere. But anyway, it's going off topic a touch, and
well, no, that's the other side of. That's basically saying that's saying that there's something, the possibility that there's something healthy about having exchanges and conversations and friendships outside of a relationship, which are important emotionally, but which are not these emotional affairs, that they're also nourishing and important, etc., but which are not necessarily absorbed or swamped by, or whatever, however you want to describe.
I think for me, the baseline is I would never tell anybody something I haven't already discussed with Bob.
Yeah.
There's nobody in the world who, well, I guess except people who knew me when I was 13.
Yeah.
But there's nobody in the world who knows stuff that I haven't discussed. Well, probably the people who know me when I was 13. I've already told Bob those stories. But
so you've probably told us as well on this podcast.
I mean, I'm an open book, aren't I?
Yeah, you've edited a few things out where I really was encouraging you to include them. But
have I?
Yeah. There's one in particular that comes to mind where I thought like it was really beautiful what you'd said about this friend of yours. And you're going to have to cut this out again.
Probably.
Do you remember the friend who you were really scared of and you became friends, and you described him, which is the part you're going to have to cut out, as you think of as being your first love?
Oh, yeah. No, I do know. Yeah, he died.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think I cut it out, and I'll leave this in here. I think I cut it out because it felt like I was making a claim on somebody's narrative that didn't have a right to respond in that moment. It felt like the way I'd articulated it was of a temperature that was too...
Oh, in relation to his death, you mean?
Yeah. So
gotcha.
It was all... It all just felt... In that conversation, it all just felt a little bit too high temperature and a little bit melodramatic. From my listening back of it, it's like, oh God, that felt too high temperature. Not that I didn't think that I loved him, because I did.
Yeah.
And in that kind of 14-year-old 14, 15-year-old not really understanding the difference between romantic love and platonic love, and the potential overlaps between the two, and when you're still developing your sense of who you are going to be in that kind of frame, and also recognizing that, you know, historically that would have been like the late 1980s, and so the potentials of kind of fluidity were just not open to us. You were one thing or the other thing, and so
it's
so
also. Go on, sorry.
No. So I think I cut that out not because I felt exposed by it or not wanting to share it. It just felt like I was making a bigger case for that feeling.
Yeah. It's such an interesting time in our lives, isn't it? It's a little bit like trying on love for size. You know, and going, I'm going to put it on this. I'm going to put the right sock on my left foot, or that doesn't seem quite right. You know, it's a very even just the use of the word. You know. Just it's such a. It feels like an age ago. You know, it really does. There's a particular kind of naivety, which is, and we've had this. Talked about it before, the sort of difference between innocence and naivety, and I think you described a certain amount of ambivalence about the word innocence, but it does in this and what we're talking about here. It seems like a kind of innocence in relation to those big feelings, those things, because it's something it's a word we use all the time when we're growing up. I love you, and we hear that we're loved mostly, and yet the articulation of it, or the expression of it, and the feeling of it is something that, outside of the context of the family, becomes a thing, a real thing to kind of get a handle on.
But the emotion,
that's so
the emotional affair. Talk to me more about that.
How do you mean?
Well, is it something you? Why did it catch your eye? What was it that sort of like? What was the hook?
It didn't make sense to me. It confused me. Yeah, which is telling. I think. I think because of the way. I think there's something weird about growing up, being around dance companies in your 20s and 30s. I mean this quite sincerely, that these are pickup companies, right? So they're incredibly intense periods of time, let's say for 3 months, 4 months, 2 months, and small groups of people, maximum maybe was 16, top of my head, but also incredibly intimate. So the conversations, the physical intimacy, so the expression of physical intimacy, even in the studio. I'm not talking about outside of the studio. I'm just talking about at work. And so there was something about where we ended up, the conversations we ended up in emotionally were incredibly, incredibly rich and strong. And those are connections I have with these people, who I don't see and don't talk to at all anymore. Maybe one or two, but where we went through something, and it was more than just the project, if you understand what I mean. And so
I do.
I think it was a particular kind of. I think I learned that kind of emotional intimacy happens at work, that it was an entirely normal thing for that to happen at work. And it's partly breached because of physical intimacy, meaning not only were we always getting changed in front of each other, so it was the question of nudity was a non-question, bizarrely, actually, given I wonder what it's like today. But also, but also physically, we were so physically proximate. We were always physically close, and it was pretty full on, pretty intense. But so there's something I'm just repeating myself now, which is I think I learned that those things, and that didn't seem to compromise the relationship I was having. Right, my relationship with Lil, I didn't seem to be somehow that was a thing that was getting in the way of, or that it was some sort of betrayal. And so I don't. It's just yeah. And so I'm just speaking off the top of my head here, which I just think what the question I have about it is, where's the line? And perhaps the line, it just comes down to the third party. That if the third party thinks a line is crossed, then a line's been crossed. But there must be sort of, I don't know that. And I'm sure that we've got listeners who are far more knowledgeable about these things and be curious to hear your thoughts, or hear their thoughts. But yeah, that's the question for me, is what that line is. How is it that we understand a line has been crossed? I think definitely. I don't think of them as secrets. It's not, because that's something being held, meaning kept from someone, which I think is quite a different action. That is, I'm not going to tell this person about that. And I think of the kinds of things that were going on. I'll just use them because they're a bit more benign, a little less hot. The conversations I was having in those dance companies. It's not that I thought I can't, or I'm going to keep these conversations from Elizabeth, from Lil. It was more that was just for those. Those were the conversations I was having with those different people. Do you see what I mean? There's a sort of distinction between there about keeping something from someone and just not thinking it mattered.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm not trying to excuse myself or anything like that, but I feel a certain amount of confusion. I wonder what it would be like to be on the backside of it, meaning if Lil did that to me, for example, and I went, wow, there's something going on here, which is... Yeah,
I'm not hearing you trying to excuse yourself. And I also... I think possibly the reason that I say everything eventually gets absorbed or is talked through with Bob is that we've also, since 19, been in exactly the same world.
Yeah.
So that is, I think that's a relatively rare set of circumstances. People can be with their partner for a really long time, but usually their partner does something different to them. And even if they do the same thing, they might, or similar things, they won't work in the same place. Whereas we've worked in the same institutions and we've made work in the same companies and we've toured work at the same time, and we don't work in the same place now, but actually weirdly there are still overlaps with our strong overlaps with our institutional roles. So maybe that's why it feels odd that there would be stuff that I wouldn't be expressing or articulating.
I mean, I think when I first met you both, though, there was something unusual about your relationship. By that I mean there was something about your closeness, your in each other's pocketsness. I love in English how you could just use the word, you put the suffix ness on something. I did it this morning in my Italian lesson. I said a word in Italian and then I just stuck the word ness on it.
The actual word nest?
Yeah,
not
the Italian version. Yeah, and my teacher just had a good old laugh about that. Do you know they use the word? There's a word for anziano, which means basically an old person. So I could say sono anziano, which means I'm an old man or I'm an old person. Mm-hmm. And it's better than saying vecchio, which is like a slightly ruder version of saying something's old. You wouldn't tend to use it for a human being, as I understand it. But they use it if you're a senior person, meaning a senior person at work. They would call you anziano.
Ah, right.
So, yeah, I was trying to talk about my anziano-ness at work. Anzianonata, I think it is. Something like that is how you say it. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I lost my train of thought, which is what happened.
Well,
there was something about your closeness, which you're in each other's pocketness, which blew my mind. You know, it really did. I remember thinking, wow, how do they do that?
Yeah. I've got nothing to say about that because it's just like I don't know how to not do that.
Yeah. And also not a judgment. It was partly I think I was a little bit in awe of it as well. I was like, whoa.
I also know that I do know that it is weird, but I also don't understand. I don't. Oh.
Did you ever watch pro wrestling when you were a kid? Did you ever see it on TV?
Do you mean the Stone Cold Steve Austin, the Rock kind of pro wrestling, or do you mean Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks pro wrestling?
I don't really know any of those words that you've just used just then, but the ones where they're basically pretending.
I think that's all pro wrestling, but I never watched. I never watched the. I've never seen. Sorry, I've never seen the American pro wrestling,
right?
Except in the
WWF is what I knew it as.
Yeah, which I now think has become WWE because WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, went, give us our acronym back, which I love. That as these two behemoths met in the ring, it was the World Wildlife Fund that won.
Exactly. It occurred to me the other day that I was trying to think about art. I was thinking about artifice and just how, as a kid, I'd never watched it. It come on TV and I look at it and go, "What? These people are just pretending. Why are so many people watching these people pretend to do this thing?" Not thinking at all about theatre, and just really, I think it was something about sport and the idea of the kind of not knowingness about sport that really appealed to me. It still appeals to me, no question. That you never know what's going to happen because it's happening as it's happening. But there was something about that artifice which really irritated the hell out of me. Like really. So I just was curious about, because I was partly I'm still trying to get a hold on where your lines are in terms of the things you like and the things you don't like, in terms of your taste.
Okay, so when I was a kid, I would wrestling was on like Saturday lunchtime on ITV. And it was British wrestling. I don't think this thing exists in quite the same way because it's been influenced by American wrestling, I think. But when I was a kid, there was a guy called Giant Haystacks and there was a guy called Big Daddy. Big Daddy was the good guy. Giant Haystacks was the bad guy. And they were big, fat men in leotards. I watched it glancingly and, like you, felt similarly frustrated by the artifice. But my perspective was, this looks like it could be a good story if they just didn't put so much sport around it.
Right.
So it was the opposite for me. It wasn't a good enough story. It wasn't convincing enough to make me want to engage with the narrative of it. I was just like, this is pretend, and it's not good pretend.
Yes, it was a little bit how I feel about circus. Sorry to all our circus-loving listeners. I know you're out there, and where I just feel like that. When I think the one time I went and saw that company that has got tours everywhere.
Cirque du Soleil.
Thank you, Cirque du Soleil. I saw it, was like, oh my God, this is just these lame stories, quasi stories, as an excuse for acts. And it was just, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I think I was expecting something much more like a narrative, but it was really not at all. It sounds that there's a similar thing to what you were just describing.
Yeah,
there.
I think very much. And I often feel the same way with certain types of dance theatre. I'm like,
I always do.
Don't try and do the acting shit. Just be super bendy and jumpy and sweaty, and just impress me with what your body can do.
What's that?
And stop trying to tell me a story because you're shit at that.
Definition of contemporary dance? People who can't act running around naked.
That's so unfair.
It's so true.
A couple of weeks ago, I saw the Bathsheba Company in Lisbon.
Did you?
Fucking hell,
they're good, eh?
My God, they are good at what they do.
Yeah, it's really that whole technique, that whole Gaga thing that was started by, what's his name, Nahareen. But extraordinary openness in the body, and also what they bring to it is really, it's a remarkable company, no question.
And they didn't try and act. Which is my takeaway. They just did physical feats that impressed me, and they did it in time to music. Oh, I booked tickets at the very last minute because we were walking through town, and there was a poster up, and it was like the day before the last show, and it was the last show was the night before we were due to fly home, and this was the time that we were breaking the flat up and making it all, like, putting it all into tiny boxes.
Hang on, sorry. This is a different thing. You saw Batshaver in Lisbon. You didn't see Batshaver
in Lisbon, yeah.
Totnes.
No. I saw it in Lisbon. So it was like maybe just about a month ago. Bob saw the poster and she went, "Oh God, I'd really love to go and see them, but it's not good timing because we will be knackered from having sorted the flat out, and we fly out really early the next day." And I was like, "Except they're right there on our doorstep, and it would be just bad manners to not go and see them." So I booked the tickets, feeling very smug with myself that I got us right at the very, very front.
Was it dance theatre?
Yeah, I guess so. That was, yeah.
Did they spit on you? Did they sweat on you?
No, they didn't. No, thankfully the stage was so big that they didn't sweat on us. But what I hadn't fully clocked was I booked us tickets in the wheelchair section of the theatre. And I rocked up, and it said wheelchair section. Obviously, it said it in Portuguese above the door, and I can read my Portuguese well enough to go, that says wheelchair section. I went, maybe this is just the door we're using. And then there was a seat for Bob, and then just a space where I was supposed to sit. And I just looked at one of the ushers and went, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And she looked at me and she went, "I want you to know that this happens at least once a day. So you need to relax and recognise that our booking system doesn't make it clear." But they had to go and find me a chair.
You got a special chair to see Batshaver.
I got a special chair. It was the single... Actually, it wasn't at all. It was the single most humiliating thing. It was funny and embarrassing, and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm stopping." And I did say, "I'm stopping somebody in a wheelchair sitting here." And she went, "No,